Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday Satsang with Raghavji. The topic for the day is Vichara Sangra, on which Raghavji has been addressing all the devotees for a number of months now, and devotees can attend both through Zoom and YouTube. Narayananji, who is at the center in the shrine, I will now request him to please initiate with Arati. Sir.
Om Achyutaya Namaha, Om Anandaya Namaha, Om Govindaya Namaha. Shuklam Bhartaram Vishnu Shashivarnam Chaturvudam Prasanna Vadanam Dhyaye Sarva Vigno Upasante Ayamurtha Samusardotu Vindvando Mandano Kalando Ayamurtha Samusardotu Tadeva Lagnam Sadinam Tadeva Tarabalam Chandravalam Tadeva Vidyabalam Daivabalam Tadeva Lakshmipate Tengrim Smarami Om Shiva Om Om Tava Om Satyam Om Tatsaudarvavanyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat Omaba Jyotir Samsam Murmuswaram नमोपाता समस्त दुर्ग चैत्वारा श्री परमेश्वर की चेतन करिष्य मानस्य कर्मणः निर्विघ्नेन प्रसन्नतम आदौ विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये रुचिया मेरे तुलसी सुरंगंधर्व देवता रुचि दिया चला लोकालिदम विष्णुतला पंचचारिवां देवपुत्रं गुरुजातनं आगमार्थं तु देवानं कमनातं दुरत्रातं खंडारवं कराम्यादौ देवमाननांदनम् नमोपाता समस्त दुर्ग चैत्वारा श्री परमेश्वर की चेतन निर्विघ्न से चेतन आदौ विघ्नेश्वर पूजां करिष्ये गणानांदा गणपतिगुं नमामि कविं कवीनां सत्रमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पति आनुष्ठुनपुष्यसादरम् अस्मिन् दर्शनाबन्धे महागणपतिं ध्यायामि महागणपतिम् आवाहयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसनं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्घ्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पाद्यं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः आसमनीयं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः उपचारिकर्तनं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः स्नानानन्तरम् आसमनीयं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः वस्त्रदातम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः यज्ञोपवीतार्थम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गंधा धारयामि समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः गंधोपदेक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः रंगनाथम् अक्षतां समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः अर्चना कुंकुमं समर्पयामि ओम महागणपतिये नमः पुष्पै पूजयामि ओम शुभाय नमः ओम एकदंताय नमः ओम कपिलाय नमः ओम गजगन्धकाय नमः ओम लंबोदराय नमः ओम विघ्नाय नमः ओम विघ्नराजाय नमः ओम विनायकाय नमः ओम धूमकेतवे नमः ओम गणाध्यक्षाय नमः ओम बालचंद्राय नमः ओम गजाननाय नमः ओम वक्रतुंडाय नमः ओम शूर्पकर्णाय नमः ओम हिरण्यवाय नमः ओम स्कंदमूर्धवाय नमः। ओम सिद्धिविनायकरे नमः। ओम शंकरमोक्ष विनायकरे नमः। ओम आतुपुर विनायकरे नमः। ओम महागणपतिये नमः। नानाविध परिमल पत्र पुष्पाणि समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। धूपार्थं समर्पयामि। अक्षतां समर्पयामि। ओम भूर्भुवस्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। देवसवितुर्वरेण्यं सत्यं ब्रह्मण्यं प्रसन्नामि अमृतत्वं स्वाहा। ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा। ओम अपानाय स्वाहा। ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा। ओम उदानाय स्वाहा। ओम समानाय स्वाहा। ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। विद्यं समर्पयामि। मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि। अमृतं समुद्रावसं समर्पयामि। कर्पूरं समर्पयामि। पूरं समर्पयामि। नीराजनं समर्पयामि। नीराजनानन्तरं आस्मन्यं समर्पयामि। महागणपतिये नमः। महागणपतिये नमः। वक्रतुण्ड महाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभ निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा। गणपति प्रसादं सरसा प्रणमामि। ओम ओम तोन्यनं तव। ओम सत्यम ओम सत्सुब्रह्मण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ओम ज्योतिर्समृद्धं नमो पात समस्त दुर्द चैत्वार श्री परमेश्वर प्रीत्यर्थम सुबह शोभने मूर्ते आद्य ब्रह्मण तीर्थ्य परार्थे श्रीवेदे वराकल्पे वैवस्वत मन्वंतरे अष्टाविंशतितमे कलियुगे प्रथमे पादे जम्बूद्वीपे भारतवर्षे भरतखण्डे मेरु दक्षिणे पार्श्वे सगाप्ते अस्मिन् वर्तमाने व्यावावृके प्रभवादीनां षष्ट्या संवत्सराणां मध्ये शोभकृतुनाम संवत्सरे दक्षिणायने वर्ष ऋतु कन्निमासे शुक्लपक्षे चतुर्थ्यां शुभतिथौ भानुवासरयुक्तायाम् उत्तराषाढ़ नक्षत्र युक्तायां शुभ नक्षत्र शुभ योग शुभ करण एवं गुण विशिष्टायाम अस्यां दशमी तिथियां शुभतिथौ मम जन्म पप्रति एतच्चरपर्यन्तं मध्ये संभावितानां सर्वेषां भावानां सत्य अवनोदनार्थम् अस्माहं सह कुटुम्बानां क्षेम सद्धर्य वीर्य विजय आयुरारोग्य ऐश्वर्याणाम् अभिवृद्ध्यर्थं समस्त मंगलाभ्यर्थं समस्त दुर्दोषशान्त्यार्थं रमण महर्षि प्रसादेन ज्ञानवैराग्य सिद्ध्यर्थं श्री रमण महर्षि पूजां करिष्ये। तदंगम कलश पूजां स करिष्ये। विघ्नेश्वरं यथास्थानं प्रतिष्ठापयामि। भुवनार्थे क्षेमाय पुनरागमनाय कलहस्य मुखे विष्णुकण्ठे रुद्रसमाधिष्ठा मूले तत्र सद्दितो ब्रह्मामाष्टमणे समृद्धा उच्चौ तु सागरा सर्वे सप्तत्रिभाव सुन्दरा दिग्वेदो यजुर्वेदो सामवेद पदर्वण गंगे सचैतन्य गोदावरी सरस्वती नर्मदे शुद्ध कावेरी जनेश्वर सन्निधं गुरु अंगै सतैता सर्वे कर्ताम्बुसमाधृता आयान्तु देव पूजार्थं दुर्दक्षकारघा तंबूरा सागर उत्पन्नो विष्णु विष्णु करे देवे से पूजित पाजन्य नमोस्तुते देवो देवादित्योक्त देव देवतान अंजन निर्माल्यम स्वयं भवने पूजित ओम सकल गुणात्म शक्ति युक्ताय योग पीडात्मने नमः आधार शक्तिये नमः मूल प्रकृतिये नमः आदिवराय नमः आदि गुरुमाय नमः आनंदाय नमः पृथ्व्यै नमः आदित्यादि नवग्रह देवताभ्यो नमः दश दिग्बालेभ्यो नमः गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरा गुरु साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः ओम अस्य श्री प्राणप्रतिष्ठा मुंडस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिर्किदिशामधर्वाणि संदांसि सकल जगत्स्थितिगति सम्मार्गार्णि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिम शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठात्मे विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्जनेभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिकाभ्यां नमः हरिं कनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः रोम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय औषट रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्वर दिग्बंध ज्ञानम रक्तांबोधिष्ठ बोधोल सत्तर्णोदकराब्जे वासं गोदंड दिक्षुत्व मणिगुण पंचबाणात् विप्राण कबालं कन्नडसिदापि नवसौरट्या देवी बालार्भवना बहुसुदरी प्राणशक्ति परान ओम आम हरिं क्रोम क्रोम हरिं माम हम यम रम लम वम सम संह हंस सोम सोम हंस अस्यामूर्तौ जीवदृष्टदो अस्यामूर्तौ सर्वेन्द्रियाणि वाङ्मनस्वस्तोत्र दिव्या त्राणवाक् प्रादिवास्तन वायुपुष्टानि या कस्ति स्वस्ति सुरम सुरम दृष्टं दृष्ट्वा ओमाश्यसी प्राणदृष्टामुदस्य ब्रह्मा विष्णु महेश्वरा ऋषिर्किदिशामधर्वाणि संदांसि सकल जगत्स्थितिगति सम्मार्गार्णि प्राणशक्ति परादेवता आम बीजम हरिं शक्ति रोम कीलकम प्राणप्रतिष्ठात्मे विनियोग आम अंगुष्ठाभ्यां नमः हरिं दर्जनेभ्यां नमः रोम मध्यमाभ्यां नमः आम अनाभिकाभ्यां नमः हरिं कनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः रोम करतलपुष्टाभ्यां नमः आम हृदयाय नमः हरिं शिरसे स्वाहा रोम शिगाय वसट आम कौसायम हरिं नेत्रदाय औषट रोम अस्त्रदाय पट पूर्वस्वर दिग्बंध असुनीले पुनरस्पाक्ष सक्ष पुनः प्राणनीनो दे भोगम योगस्य में सूर्य मत्सदय मनमदय मलयान शक्ति आवायुधो भव सद्दाविदो भव सन्निधो भव सन्निधो भव अवगुंडितो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुप्रसन्नो भव सुमुखो भव वरदो भव प्रसिद्ध प्रसिद्ध स्वामी सर्वजगन्नाथ यावत् पूजावसानकं तावत् ध्रुवं प्रतिभावेन बिम्बेऽस्मिन् सन्निधं कुरु ओम भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो न प्रचोदयात् दिवसं सत्यं दुर्दण्ड प्रसन्नामि अमृतत्वं स्वाहा ओम प्राणाय स्वाहा ओम अपाने स्वाहा ओम ज्ञानाय स्वाहा ओम उदानाय स्वाहा ओम समानाय स्वाहा ओम ब्रह्मणे स्वाहा ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल रमणाय नमः स्वामी दक्षिणामूर्ति नटराजा भैरव नंदीश्वराज पार्वती नमः शिवाय नमः शिवाय दैविकपन्न नैवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये मध्ये पानीयं समर्पयामि अमृतं समुद्रावसं समर्पयामि नीराजनं समर्पयामि नीराजनानन्तरम् आचमनीयं समर्पयामि हरि ओम हरि ओम All I will recite Bhagwan's Namastotra. All of you can recite it along with me. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parabrahma Tasmai Se Gurave Namaha Abharadakti Sugavari Yashorya Sorni Matram Bhuvaram Tamastam Gurayidam Tam Ramnam Gaviram Vindavirinam Nirdi Chindayami Om Mahasena Mahonsena Jataya Namaha Om Sri Ramanaya Namaha Om Gurave Namaha Om Agandasam Visagaraya Namaha Om Maujase Namaha Om Karanodbhavaya Namaha Om Jagat Idavadaraya Namaha Om Sri Bhuminadasta Lotidaya Namaha Om Parasara Kulotam Sai Namaha Om Sundaratadavapalaya Namaha Om Kaminiya Sucharitraya Namaha Om Sayaya Masaya Mate Namaha Om Shonasula Mahudina Manasaya Namaha Om Swarnastagaya Namaha Om Srimadvadasanta Mahastale Rapta Vidyodhyaya Namaha Om Mahashakti Nivadena Prabhuttaya Namaha Om Paramartha Vidye Namaha Om Divyiraya Namaha Om Pitrabudan Veshine Namaha Om Indu Morina Pitrabade Namaha Om Pitradeshta Sonasailam Grattaya Namaha Om Tapomayaya Namaha Om Udasinaya Namaha Om Mahayogine Namaha Om Mahosahaya Namaha Om Kushagradiye Namaha Om Shanta Sankalpa Sampravaya Namaha Om Sutundruse Namaha Om Savitre Namaha Om Sthiraya Namaha Om Tavashavida Sarvangaya Namaha Om Ullanbuja Vilojanaya Namaha Om Chandrika Sudasri Mandidanina Mandalaya Namaha Om Sudavakyam Samashinaya Namaha Om Surnidakira Vipramaya Namaha Om Veda Vedanta Tattvatnaya Namaha Om Chinmutrane Namaha Om Trigunadikaya Namaha Om Virupaksha Bhuvavasaya Namaha Om Virajana Salakudiye Namaha Om Uddiktanayanaaya Namaha Om Purnaya Namaha Om Rasidasana Tandavaya Namaha Om Gambhiraya Namaha Om Paramacharyaya Namaha Om Subrasanyaya Namaha Om Abhayapradaya Namaha Om Dakshinashinivaya Namaha Om Dhiraya Namaha Om Dakshinabhimugaya Namaha Om Swaraje Namaha Om Maharishye Namaha Om Bhagavate Namaha Om Ityaya Namaha Om Bhumavidya Visharadaya Namaha Om Vimalaya Namaha Om Dirghadarshane Namaha Om Aptaya Namaha Om Rujamarka Pradarshagaya Namaha Om Samatruse Namaha Om Satyatruse Namaha Om Satyaya Namaha Om Prasandaya Namaha Om Amida Vikramaya Namaha Om Sukumaraya Namaha Om Sadanandaya Namaha Om Riduvashine Namaha Om Dayarnavaya Namaha Om Sri Sonasura Iruppuda Skandasrama Nigetanaya Namaha Om Sandarsanobudeshkare Namaha Om Sadbhakta Prinda Paripudaya Namaha Om Ganesha Munipringena Sevitam Tusaroruvaya Namaha Om Jitobadesha Saradi Granda Samsinna Samsyaya Namaha Om Varnasrama Madadidaya Namaha Om Rasaknaya Namaha Om Samvamyaya Namaha Om Atmavade Namaha Om Sarvavani Padasthana Maharatyaya Namaha Om Sarvasatguline Namaha Om Atmaramaya Namaha Om Mahabhagaya Namaha Om Matrimukti Vidayaya Namaha Om Vinadaya Namaha Om Vinudaya Namaha Om Vipraya Namaha Om Munindraya Namaha Om Bhavagojvalaya Namaha Om Darshanadaka Sammarine Namaha Om Maurena Swatmabodhagaya Namaha ओम ऋचादिकर सानिध्याय नमः। ओम स्प्रणात्मंद मोचकाय नमः। ओम अंतस्मिरजंडाक्षवे नमः। ओम संसारानुवत्तारकाय नमः। ओम सोनादुष्टी दुष्टरे नमः। ओम आर्त विद्या प्रकाशकाय नमः। ओम अविच्युत निज प्रज्ञाय नमः। ओम नैसर्गिक महातमसे नमः। ओम कमंडलुधराय नमः। ओम सुब्रगवीनवसनाय नमः। ओम गुहाय नमः। ओम दंडवाणिये नमः। ओम कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ओम पौरोग विषक्वराय नमः। ओम स्कंदाय नमः। ओम देवदमाय नमः। ओम अमर्त्याय नमः। ओम सेनानिये नमः। ओम पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। कार्तिकाय नमः। मुरुगाय नमः। वल्ली देवाने नमः। सुब्रह्मण्याय नमः। स्वामीनाथने नमः। दक्षिणामूर्तिये नमः। नटराजने नमः। भैरवरे नमः। नंदीमहेश्वराय नमः। शिवपार्वतीये नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। ओम शिवाय नमः। Now I will recite Upadesha Saram. All of you can recite along with me. Turagaya prapade palam karma gimbaram karma dajjadam vedi madado padana karanam palamasaswadam gadanirodhanam ईश्वरार्पितं नेचया कृतं सिद्धसोदकं मुक्तिसाधकं कायवामन कार्यमुद्गमं भूजनं जव चिन्तनं क्रमा जगतईसति युक्तसेवनम् अष्टमूर्तिभृत् देवभूजनम् उत्तमस्तवा दुर्जमन्दद सिद्धजं जप ज्ञानमुद्गमम् आद्यधारया क्रोधसाधमं सरलचिन्तनं विरलदबरं वेदभावना लोभमित्यसौ भावनाभिधा भावनीमता भावशून्यसत् भावसुस्तुति भावना बलात् भक्तिरुद्धमा इरुस्थले मन स्वस्थता क्रिया भक्ति योगमो गाच निश्चितम् वायुरोदना दीयते मन जालभक्षिव रोधसाधनम् चित्तवायवत् चित्क्रियायुधा रागयोर्द्वयी शक्तिमूलगा लयविनाशने उभयरोदने लयकदं पुनर्भवति नो मृदं प्राणबन्धना लीनमानसम् एकचिन्दना नासमेद्यत नष्टमानसो दृष्टयोगिन कृत्यमस्ति किं स्वस्तिदं यद दृश्यवारितं चित्तमात्मन चित्वदर्शनं तत्त्वदर्शनं मानसं तु किं मार्गणे कृते नैव मानसं मार्गार्गवा वृद्धयस्त्वहं वृद्धिमाश्रिता वृद्धयो मनो विद्यहं मन अहमयं कुतो भवति किन्वद ऐपदत्यहं निजविसारणम् अहमिनाशवा अहमहन्तया स्फुरधीरस्वयं परमपूर्णस इदमहं वदा अभिख्यमन्वहम् अहं विलीनके अप्यल्यसत्यया विग्रहे क्रिय प्राणधीतम नाम से कथत् तज्जडं स्वतत् तत्स्वभासिका चित्ववेदरा तद्दया इति विद्ययायहम् ईशदीर्घयोर्वेषदीपिका तत्स्वभावतो वस्तु केवलम् वेश आनद स्वात्मदर्शनम् ईशदर्शनम् स्वात्मरूपत आत्मसंस्थिति स्वात्मदर्शनम् आत्मनिर्भयात् आत्मनिष्ठता ज्ञानवर्धिता अज्ञानहीनति ज्ञानमस्ति किं ज्ञातुमन्तरम् किं स्वरूपमे आत्मदर्शने अव्यया भवा पूर्णसिद्धुगम् यदिं संबरं सुगं वस्तुदेविक आमवेदगं निजविबानगं महतितं दभो रमणवागियं महतितं दभो रमणवागियं महतितं दभो रमणवागियम्। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। ओम नमो भगवते श्री अरुणाचल श्री रमणाय नमः। हरि ओम हरि ओम हरि ओम। श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः।
இன்னைக்கு பூஜையா?
ஆன்லைன் இருக்கேன்.
அப்படியா?
Namo Ramana. A very warm welcome to all the devotees for Raman Kendra Delhi's Sunday satsang with Raghavji. As earlier, Raghavji shall be speaking to us on the earliest set of instructions given by Bhagavan in his own handwriting, condensed in the form of Vichara Sangra, or self-inquiry, as preserved by Gambhiran Seshaya. Raghavji, of course, has been guiding us for the last 3 years. However, just for the introduction to some of the new devotees who have joined us, Raghavji is a devotee of Bhagwan Sri Raman Maharishi with a background of Vedanta study under various acharyas of Rishikesh and Uttarkashi over several years. After completing a degree in technology in 1993 and a few years of research in electronics, he was drawn to the exclusive pursuit of the path of self-inquiry. He was blessed to be closely associated with the Ramakrishna Mission Arshavidya tradition and the Adi Shankara Brahma Vidyapeeth. Since 2001, he divides his time between Uttarkashi and Tiruvannamalai. He occasionally shares what he has learned from the acharyas with fellow devotees. Raghavji addresses devotees of Raman Kendra Delhi every last Sunday or fourth Sunday of the month. I shall now request Raghavji to take over. Sir, over to you.
Namaste and welcome. Am I audible? Namaste, Anuragji. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Om Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavadvyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Vande Shri Ramanashehe Acharyasya Padabjam Yome Darshayadisham Bhantam Dhantamatitya. Welcome to another session where we study the Vichara Sangraham of Bhagavan. During the last talk, we had seen how Bhagavan answers questions about the Ashtanga Yoga of Patanjali. Specifically, he answers the question of the disciple Sri Gambhiram Sheshaya that if breath control only leads to the quiescence of the mind, which is manolaya, which is just a temporary condition, and not to its destruction, how can it be said that breath control is the means for inquiry which aims at the destruction of mind? A very valid and intelligent question, indicating the disciple's own maturity and understanding. And Bhagavan answers saying that the scriptures teach the means for gaining self-realization in two modes, as the yoga with 8 limbs, which is Ashtanga Yoga, also known as the Yoga of Patanjali, which is unfolded in the Yoga Sutras. And as the knowledge with 8 limbs, Ashtanga Jnana, which Bhagavan will go on to explain those very limbs in a different Jnana orientation. By regulation of breath or by absolute retention thereof, Kevala Kumbhaka, which is one of the limbs of yoga, the mind gets controlled. Without leaving the mind at that, if one practices the further discipline, such as withdrawal of the mind from external objects, then at the end, self-realization, which is the fruit of inquiry, will surely be gained. So as we can see, Bhagavan immediately sees that the disciple has a certain interest, and not just interest, he also has a certain capacity to fruitfully use the Ashtanga sadhanas. And like the master guru that he was, he validates the question of the disciple. He recommends and accepts that pranayama is very useful as a stepping stone to Atma Vichara. He doesn't take a kind of patronizing attitude towards pranayama. He recognizes its immense use and benefit for many genuine disciples, even those who are on the path of Atma Vichara. They can fruitfully practice pranayama. That is Bhagavan's message here. And then the disciple goes on to ask, what are the limbs of yoga? Upon which Bhagavan enumerates the 8 well-known limbs of Patanjali. So remember that whenever we talk of these different methods of sadhana, there is always a very deep tradition of texts, and those texts are unfolded by many great teachers. So there is something called a pramana for all these different steps. It's not as if somebody has just made it up. Today, often there is a pressure amongst many teachers to say, I have discovered it by myself. Bhagavan, on the other hand, validates the entire pre-existing tradition. He doesn't try to say that I am doing something absolutely new or original, because in the field of Advaita, of Brahma Jnana, originality is not a great merit. It might only mean subjectivity. It might only mean something colored by the person's ragadveshas, likes and dislikes. So Bhagavan very beautifully validates the existing tradition, and therefore draws from that very tradition to communicate the knowledge of the self. And he goes on to say, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. These are the well-known 8 steps. For those of you who may not know some details here, Bhagavan goes on to list and explain these 8 limbs of Patanjali. But like I said, the reference text for this 8-limbed path is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. India's rich spiritual heritage has this universal component of self-inquiry, which everyone today is able to access so beautifully and benefit, thanks to Bhagavan, thanks to Adi Shankara, who preserved it in the early medieval ages, the 8th century. Definitely, we owe a debt of gratitude and love towards these acharyas and our own beloved Acharya Bhagavan for communicating that in the modern context, self-inquiry. And then again, there is this other tradition of Ashtanga Yoga also, which is pretty much prevalent today, given its fairly non-sectarian orientation. So this text called the Patanjali Yoga Sutras has so many beautiful universal truths. It's a testimony to the greatness of Bharatavarsha that we have preserved and nurtured this tradition without binding it down to any one sect or any one theology. It's no wonder that the Yoga Sutras are taught even in many Buddhist monasteries, particularly of the Mahayana tradition. That kind of goes to show how what is unfolded and taught in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are a universal human heritage, a science of the mind, a science of the breath, and how one can work with the breath to gradually control the mind. And then, through that very control of the mind, one understands the mind through self-inquiry and self-knowledge unfolded through the words of the Guru and dwelling upon and understanding those words of the Guru. So this process is therefore very helpful of studying in brief the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and we will read what Bhagavan has to say about that. The first of these 8 limbs or 8 steps on this ladder of the Yoga of Patanjali is called Yama. Yama here means restraint or control. It refers to the fact that for and societies in general, the necessity to observe a certain restraint is more important than even the necessity to actually do certain things in the form of self-discipline and so on, as we will see. So the yamas or the yama consists of 5 disciplines, which Bhagavan enlists, saying, Yama stands for the cultivation of such principles of good conduct as ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. And these 5 rules of good conduct are non-negotiable as steps towards self-inquiry because they embody commitment to values, commitment to behavior which is in alignment with self-knowledge. So without the practice and commitment to yama, the possibility of self-inquiry is not there. Unless a reasonable degree of commitment is there to yama. Why we say reasonable? Because there is always scope for better adherence to yama or the rules of good conduct or values as they are called today. So that commitment to values stems from one cardinal tenet called ahimsa or non-injury. We can also say non-violence, but perhaps a better translation would be non-injury. Bhagavan uses the word ahimsa there. And unlike in some of the, let's say, non-Indian traditions of unfolding values, the Indian traditions do not bring in a certain creator or some supreme being who thrusts these values upon his creations or the jivas here. So these values, starting with ahimsa, are not commandments given to us. Thou shalt not be violent. That's not the idea here. Instead, non-violence or non-injury, ahimsa, is a value which we cultivate, understanding that it's what makes sense to me. It's what makes me a person who's together, who doesn't have any inner conflict between words and action. So that absence of inner conflict is what makes me appreciate and own up ahimsa for myself, not out of fear of a creator, a jealous God who has given this commandment of ahimsa. So that's the very good and important difference between how many of these values are treated in the Advaita and the other Dharma traditions, as compared to the more innocent tradition of assuming that there is a creator. He says, if you don't follow this rule, you will go to hell, or you will have to pay a price because I will take retributive action, revenge upon you. Instead, here, we recognize that if I am in alignment with ahimsa, if my conduct conforms to this value called ahimsa, then I am at peace. I can sleep easily. I can enjoy even the simple moments in my life, provided I am together in the first place. In contrast, if these values, starting with ahimsa, the yama as it's called, if these values are not adhered to by me, there is a continuous conflict. There is a continuous split in the personality. And if I were to be able to recognize that connection between adherence to values and my own happiness, my own togetherness, which in the larger tradition of Vedanta is called to be a yuktaha. Sri Krishna Bhagavan in Gita uses that word, yuktaha. Yuktaha is to be together, not having a split inside, not having a conflict inside, which makes for little happiness even in general life. And so the important thing is to recognize that values are something that come from within me, which are for me. I recognize their importance to make me a happy, contented, and a confident person. They're not because of fear of some commandment from outside of me. And in that spirit, Bhagavan goes on to list the other values, satya, after ahimsa, which is non-injury, based on the simple inherent principle in every human being. I do not wish to inflict any hurt to others, which I wouldn't wish to be inflicted upon me. As we say, do unto others as you would want others to do unto you. That simple, commonsensical reciprocity is behind all these yamas or values. And so that very principle of ahimsa is then unfolded further. So one version of ahimsa, okay, don't do physical or perhaps mental harm to anybody. That same principle of ahimsa, expanded, elaborated a little further, gives satya. Satya is adherence to verbal truth. So I don't take advantage through my words of anyone, just as I don't want to be taken advantage of by anybody else. The principle of reciprocity again operates here, not any external commandment, like I said. So Satya therefore refers to speaking what I know to be true. And then asteya. Asteya is to not to covet and try to grab what is not rightfully mine. So I have that sensitivity that something doesn't rightfully belong to me, and I have no interest in coveting. Coveting means to try and grab and take possession of something else that doesn't belong to me rightfully. And that asteya, or non-stealing as it's called, is another value. Again, another expansion of that very word ahimsa. And then there is aparigraha, or non-hoarding. I try not to accumulate more than what I realistically need in a medium-term interval. There is great subjectivity possible there, no doubt, but at least as a matter of principle, I try to keep my lifestyle medium to low maintenance lifestyle. I don't necessarily need a huge high carbon footprint kind of a lifestyle, to put it in today's parlance. So non-hoarding refers to a commitment to a sustainable lifestyle here. The more I hoard, the more I have dependence on high maintenance gadgets, high maintenance lifestyle choices, the more I am going away from this value of aparigraha. And lastly, this value called brahmacharya. Brahmacharya is a very complex and multifaceted word. So we'll spend a little time dwelling on what are the implications of brahmacharya, particularly in the context of Bhagavan's path of self-inquiry. So for the record, the word brahmacharya originally had the sense of Gurukula Vasa, very neutral word. So youngsters at the age of 8 were sent off to a Vedic school, a Vedic Gurukula, where these boys were mentored and taught by the Guru as parts or members of his own family. It was not really a professional kind of relationship, but more like a father figure who was loved, respected, and also feared to some extent. Because the parents didn't probably summon up that kind of awe amongst these young boys, 8 years old. And so therefore, the parents wisely sent them to this Gurukula, usually in a nearby city or town or village. And that guru became the mentor or the teacher. So brahmacharya is Gurukula Vasa. That was the old meaning of the word brahmacharya. The word Brahma denotes the Vedas. The word Brahma has many meanings. In this case, the older meaning was Brahma implies study of the Vedas, and brahmacharya is studying the Vedas to become accomplished in traditional study. That was the swadharma. That was the intended dharma of many students there. And brahmacharya was what their lifestyle was. Now, as part of that Gurukula Vasa, between the ages 8 to up to 24, generally 16 to 18, around 8 years minimum, but the more advanced and more serious students would study for another 8 years. So that makes it 24 years. So most of them would go between 8 to 16, and a few more interested, more committed students would study for another 8 years from 16 to 24. And they had a very strict rule of serving the Guru, of following the rules of the Gurukula, which were designed so as to not to disturb others in that very Gurukula. And one of those rules of the Gurukula Vasa was to abstain from any attraction towards the opposite gender, to abstain from any kind of sexual relationship was one of the rules of those Gurukulas. Mind you, the age we are talking about primarily was from age 8 to age 16 years. And there was a very clear and awareful understanding that celibacy or abstention from any activity which is of a sexual kind greatly helps in assimilating the higher truths of the Vedas and Vedanta. There was not so much a moralistic stance here, in the sense there was no attaching of any idea of sin to the mere fact of sexual activity. Instead, it was a violation of the dharma of that ashrama. So in that ashrama of between 8 to 16 primarily, and by choice if you would continue up to 24, practice of celibacy was greatly helpful to what they were trying to do, which is to study and assimilate the deepest truths of the Vedas and also to some extent the Vedanta, and which unfolded self-knowledge. Even in recent studies, there is evidence to show that the postponement of puberty by even as less as 1 year greatly enhances development of the deeper faculties of the mind, compassion, and self-understanding, self-reflection, and so on. So today one might argue that the correlation doesn't seem to hold, because we can see many great so-called intelligent people, great scholars, and so on, have no commitment at all to celibacy. And so there we are doing an apples and oranges comparison. We need to take two people with the same degree of faculties, same level of social and other privileges, and then see the difference. That would be a fair comparison, particularly with children. So if we were to take two children between the ages 8 to 16, one group committed to celibacy and self-restraint, another group, once they are into their early teens and adolescence, let's say they are given access to the kind of modern media and inputs, which prematurely results in the onset of puberty. If we see a same-to-same comparison, for sure studies have indicated that those youngsters in whom puberty is postponed, they have much greater grasping, much greater academic and social characteristics as compared to those in whom prematurely the hormonal changes have started occurring. This is all by the way. To say that brahmacharya is often given a very bad name these days because of the highly skeptical attitude of the intellectual, scholars and university academics who are the policymakers today towards the traditional idea of brahmacharya. But there is much in it to commend itself, particularly when it was well understood that we are not talking about any kind of suppression of the sexual instinct. We are not talking about any kind of condemnation of being a non-celibate. There is no condemnation or any attachment of the word sin to sexual activity. Nevertheless, we have to see that brahmacharya, therefore, is highly helpful, and there is a certain pushback required against the modern trend to demean and look down upon brahmacharya, which is often prevalent, with the awareness that there is a fine line between celibacy between the ages 8 to 16 and then guilt, which is unhealthy. So you see the fine line there. Brahmacharya doesn't mean guilt. It doesn't mean suppression. It means a voluntary discipline at a younger age for a higher purpose. And after that, it denotes moderate indulgence in sexual activity, which doesn't violate the other dharmas of ahimsa, satya, and so on. So when there is truthfulness and then when there is trust between partners, all of that is within the ambit of brahmacharya. It doesn't violate brahmacharya. So with this very sensitive and subtle value of brahmacharya also unfolded as part of yama, we then see the next of the 8-limbed yoga path. Remember, all these 5 words which we saw are all called yama, beginning with ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. And like I said, all of these denote a certain sense of restraint. You voluntarily refrain from that with a certain knowledge that it's for my good. I assimilate those values, recognizing the connection between these values and my own happiness, these values and my own larger interest. There's the famous study called the marshmallow study. Some of you may have heard of that, where there were 2 groups of children. And let's say all those children there liked a certain sweet, the marshmallow. And then a partial group of them was given a test. So they were all taken to a room, these children, and then half of them, or no, rather this group of children, were given a marshmallow in front of them, a kind of sweet, very tasty and soft and gooey. And they were given a choice. Either you eat this marshmallow right now, or if you refrain from eating the marshmallow for 1 hour, then the adult, the supervisor, will come and he'll give you 1 more extra marshmallow. So they were given a choice of what's known as delayed sense gratification. So do you want to gratify the senses right now, or are you ready to withhold sense gratification for a larger reward waiting for you at the end? Do you have that degree of control? And certain of those students, children there, just ate the marshmallow. They didn't care for all the complicated thinking and analyzing required to withhold and not eat the marshmallow. So they just swallowed it up immediately. And then some of those students chose to wait until the end of that session, an hour or more than that, so that they would get that extra marshmallow, and then they could eat 2 marshmallows. And then they did a cohort study. They followed up this group of students down the years. And astonishingly, those students who withheld themselves from eating that first marshmallow, who waited until they got the 2 marshmallows, they excelled in their academics, they excelled in their social indices, they excelled in emotional intelligence, they excelled in virtually every parameter that makes for a great human being, as compared to the group which just grabbed the marshmallow and ate it off immediately. Again, goes to show how these values, therefore, are a matter of the adult equivalent of the marshmallow test. Am I able to control myself, not grab what is immediately there, because there's a larger reward for me? The larger reward of being together, being happy, being satisfied and being proud of myself, which comes from commitment to these values. Sri Krishna goes on to say that yamas are so important. He says that for the one who has no commitment to the yamas, he is not together. He is an ayuktaha, one who has a split, a conflict inside. And such an ayuktaha, Sri Krishna says, will not have shanti. His mind will not be at peace. The one who is not together, in whom there is a split between the knower I, the one who knows that I should not hurt another person. It's painful. I don't want pain. He knows that. Every human being knows that. And yet he acts in a way contrary to that. So the knower I is in conflict with the doer I. There are two eyes there, as though the eye has got split. And so that person without a commitment to values has ashanti, says Krishna. There's no shanti in his mind. And for such a person without shanti, ashantasya kuta sukham, says Krishna. Where is sukha? Where is happiness? Even from the simple joys of the world, even from the simple objects and situations that the world presents. Where is the joy? There is no joy possible if the person is not first having the shanti at all in the first place. And so there is much to understand in yama itself, the very first foundational level of the eight-limbed yoga of Patanjali. Then the next one is called niyama. In contrast to the first of the eight limbs, which were more restraints on a person's conduct and emphasis on values and delayed sense gratification, which we saw, niyama stand for a positive cultivation of certain practices and personal habits. They stand for the observance of such rules of good conduct as purity, shaucha, contentment, santosha, tapas, austerity, swadhyaya, study of the sacred texts, and Ishvara pranidhana, devotion to God. So these five are the standard Patanjali words. Shaucha, santosha, tapas, swadhyaya, Ishvara pranidhanani, says Patanjali. And these five, as you can see, are positive rules of conduct, not so much restraints. Shaucha, one practices cleanliness, keeps the body and also the mind clean, by which is meant we consciously try not to carry forward any accounts from a given day's social interactions. We try to minimize to the extent possible the residues left behind after every day's conduct at work or with the people around us. That is shaucha. And of course, the external cleanliness in the form of being hygienic, following rules of cleanliness and hygiene, all of that is taken for granted here. But an additional fact is the antar shaucha, the inner cleanliness too. One accomplishes that first of all by recognizing that whatever I do or whatever I engage in throughout the day leaves a little residue. So regularity in one's daily atma vichara or mantra repetition or pranayama, whatever one does on a regular basis is very helpful towards the end of the day, particularly. Devoting even those 10 to 15 minutes minimum to this shaucha is an important niyama or observance. And then you have santosha, contentment. This again is connected to the idea of finding joy out of the small things in life, which are not really small if we come to think of it. Finding joy in things that need a lot of money and expenditure of time, effort, energy, that's the opposite of santosha. And on the other hand, finding great joy in things which require so much less effort and which have come to us by our legitimate efforts in life, that is all contentment or santosha. So santosha is translated in English as contentment. The idea here is not complacency. Remember, contentment and complacency are two different things. Contentment implies a lack of resentment about what is. Oh, my lot is so bad. So there's no resentment like that. I try to discover that happiness independent of these external challenges which continue to remain. To the extent possible, at least, I discover joy out of the little things in life. Even something like watching a beautiful sunrise. sparing those few minutes just to be present with what one is doing. Enjoying a meal, we are totally present enjoying that meal. That is all part of contentment. And that is never totally denied to anybody. The more we live in the head, as they say, you know, the expression used these days is, I've got to get out of the head, because they are so much into some anxiety and about planning and thinking about the future, analyzing the past. So all of that leads to a certain being too much in the head. That leaves little room for santosha, discovering joy out of the present moment, which is not always full of some planning and thinking and so on. Merely looking at some objects around can give us a lot of joy. Looking at plants around, and even so, the little things that you do, you discover and find a lot of contentment there. That is the value called santosha here. Next is tapas, or austerity, a single word translation, roughly called austerity. The word tapas itself implies a sense of heat. Tapa in Sanskrit means heat. And here it implies that there is a certain friction, a certain resistance whenever we try to go against one's habits and one's accustomed patterns of eating, drinking, sleeping, all the usual things. So, in the spirit of tapas, we kind of pull back and resist these pulls, see where, to what extent these pulls are having a hold over me. And so one form of tapas could be, let's say, partial fast, skipping a meal, trying to play around a little with the meal timings, maybe a little intermediate fasting. All of that is a kind of tapas, especially when it is done with the aim of becoming aware of the mind and the way it plays upon us, makes us feel, I am dependent on these habits. I am so dependent on things being the way they are, with my lifestyle, with my food, with my clothes, with the weather, with what I have in my room. All of that denotes a lack of tapas if I am excessively dependent on all of these things. And so tapas asks us to challenge ourselves, try and practice a certain intelligent staying away from these little things we feel we are dependent on. So the popular forms of tapas would be fasting on certain days of the week, or waking up at certain earlier hours than you're maybe accustomed to. These are all not to really torture yourself, but just to find that space between you and these kind of habits we take for granted. And ultimately, you're the judge. Is doing that tapas helping you find that little freedom from that habit, or is it counterproductive and it's amounting to a great deal of unnecessary kind of self-torture? Then that's counterproductive. We are not interested in self-condemnation and self-torture. The self is divine. The self is of the nature of purity and consciousness, doesn't have to be tortured. So the idea of tapas, therefore, is something entirely left to ourselves. In certain other contexts, the highest tapas is said to be the practice of self-inquiry itself. But that is to get ahead of the story here. And in this context, tapas is merely trying to challenge yourself in a friendly way, the way you might try to do better at some game you're playing. Not to say that I am no good and therefore I should do something better. Not in that sense. But to say that, well, let me see if I can play around with my waking time, maybe with my food. Let me see if I can do without something that I am accustomed to. In that spirit, all tapas is ordained here. And similarly, the study of sacred texts or swadhyaya. Patanjali interprets the word swadhyaya in two ways, both as a study of sacred texts as well as certain mantra repetitions. But for now, we can take Bhagavan's meaning as the primary meaning, study of the sacred texts. And the reason why it is mentioned is because when you study something carefully, you are living and resonating with the thoughts expressed in those texts. Even the reading of the Guru's words are also part of Swadhyaya. Reading the text referred to, referenced by the Guru, also Swadhyaya. So Swadhyaya is therefore bringing our mind to resonate with the words of the Guru, which is available to us in the form of written words, written books. So when we do not have, let's say, the physical presence of the body of the Guru, meaning he's not there to have a conversation, then his words are our living guide. His words help us resonate with the heart of the Guru. And so study of the sacred text is a greatly helpful niyama, one of the observances. Remember, all these are in the second of the 8 limbs. The yamas, the restraints of the first limb, subdivided into 5, and niyamas are again subdivided into these 5. Shaucha, Santosha, Tapaha, and Swadhyaya. Finally, Ishvara Pranidhana. The 5th of the niyamas stands for an attitude of surrender of whatever we regard as our actions, my actions. You surrender ownership of those actions. In other words, you recognize that whatever I am doing is part of the universal play, this drama that is going on. I'm merely doing my role. So you don't have these grandiose delusions that I am so great, I'm doing something fantastic. Well, I'm just doing my little role. I'm happy about it, about Ishvara, the cosmic being, giving me this role to play. I have absolutely no complaints. And then there is also no sense of great ownership, no boasting, no egotism centered around one's actions, which are offered unto Ishvara. Even as you offer a flower at the altar, in that spirit, you do all your actions, not just the meditation. Every action that you do in your life is permeated by the spirit of Ishvara Pranidhana. So that has the Ishvararpana Buddhi, as we say in the context of the Gita. So that very Ishvararpana Buddhi is rephrased here as Ishvara Pranidhana. And then again, apart from the actions that you perform, you also have that same attitude of surrender and offering, surrender rather, when you get the results of your actions. So whenever something comes to you, a situation or any event which is not of your own immediate doing, in the sense that you don't have a choice over changing that, then you accept heartfully, accept gracefully that that is coming from the altar of the divine. So this attitude is called Ishvara Prasada Buddhi. In the Bhagavad Gita, the word Karma Yoga is referred to this very refer to this very Ishvara Pranidhana. What is called Ishvara Pranidhana in the Yoga Sutras is called Karma Yoga, consisting of these 2 attitudes really, which make for Ishvara Pranidhana, of offering your actions to the divine without any grandiose delusions and ownership that I am so great in having done all this. And then again, when the results come to, you have that realistic acceptance that, okay, this is the way the universe has dealt out a deal to me, and I accept that. I shall make the best of it. Even be it a very challenging deal, I accept and heartily do what I can. They say that's the best way to please, if you like, Ishvara. Ishvara, or the cosmic being, very quickly reveals himself, showers his grace on one who has this non-resentful acceptance of what cannot be changed in one's life. It is all part of Ishvara Pranidhana. So by these 2 foundational values or steps in the 8-limbed path of Patanjali, one comes to the third of these 8 limbs called asana. So like I said, yama and niyama were regarded as like the foundation of a building. Without strong foundations, you cannot erect a superstructure. So traditionally, yama niyama was given much greater importance than asana. But over a period of time, due to the very maybe weakness of human beings, and to some extent, perhaps keeping in view the backgrounds and the motivations of modern, let's say, spiritual aspirants, certain gurus have given these 2 a little bit of a backseat, yama niyama, and kind of try to start with asana, third of the 8 limbs. So we'll see how that has a certain advantage as well, but also certain disadvantage. Then one becomes totally focused on asana as the be-all and end-all of yoga practice as it is come to be today. All kinds of fancy courses done only focusing on asana, to the detriment of both the other limbs preceding and succeeding asana. Very often found because it's so much easier to access, and the yama and niyama are so much more difficult. In that sense, They require a great deal of honesty. They are not difficult in the sense of taking a lot of effort, but they need a lot of honesty, a lot of sensitivity, which is not so easy in that sense to nurture and arrive at. So yama niyamas being a little difficult, people tend to start off with asana. The advantage in doing that is, well, at least some tamas which is there in the body and mind will be dissolved. And once the body gets moving, and once there is a certain awareful breathing and so on in tandem with the asana practice, there is a certain greater promise of yama and niyama being brought into the picture. So, no doubt, starting with asana is a good way when yama and niyama seem much more difficult and seem to be beyond our capacity. If that be the case, okay, the acharyas in recent times have given us that concession. Okay, do yama, do asana, but then do keep track of yama and niyama as well. Do not ignore them totally. And what is asana? So Bhagavan goes on to say, of the different postures or asanas, 84 are the main ones. So this is incidentally given in one of the less well-known texts to common people, at least, called the Gheranda Samhita. For those of you who have some idea of these texts, the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, remember, enumerate these 8 limbs, and there is not much elaboration of asana in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Just one sutra out of 196 describes asana, defines asana. And then where are all the asanas mentioned then? We have so many teachers and so much of yoga teaching going on in the with the asana practice being the predominant limb being taught. Well, the answer is that the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, a later text, has more details of some asanas. About 12 of the later asanas are prescribed there. Even those 12 are not really that well known or that important today. Instead, the later text called the Gheranda Samhita lists 84 asanas. Now, that's where you get the full range of Hatha Yoga, full range of different postures giving different benefits, and also how it affects the flow of prana through the various centers in the body and so on. So this later text called Gheranda Samhita is what is being referred to by Bhagavan, who obviously knew about that fairly well. So Bhagavan doesn't show all of that because he probably feels, unnecessarily people get distracted into all kinds of texts. Let them get the essence of these texts and then stay focused on Atma Vichara. So with that spirit, as you can see, Bhagavan is very well versed and very knowledgeable about the 84 main asanas mentioned here in the Gheranda Samhita. And therefore he says, of the different postures, 84 are the main ones. Of these again, 4 are said to be excellent. Again, this is in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And he lists the 4 there, saying they are Simhasana, Bhadrasana, Padmasana, and Siddhasana. So these 4 today, Simhasana is usually called Vajrasana sometimes. You kind of fold the legs, you flex the knees, and sit on the heels. A small variation of that is today called Simhasana, where they actually make a lion's face and let out the air. But here the Simhasana referred to is a meditation pose. So commonly today we use the word Vajrasana or the thunderbolt pose as it's called in English. So you just sit Japanese style during the tea ceremony with the knees flexed and with the weight of the body resting on the heels. So that's called Simhasana in this context. Then you have Bhadrasana, which is also a kind of cross-legged pose with the knees, with the heels brought together. It's a kind of advanced pose, really, but people have used it for longer hours of sitting. So that's popularly called the butterfly pose. Very close to the butterfly pose is what is called Bhadrasana here. Then you have the Padmasana, the famous lotus pose, where you draw in the heels to come above the other lower leg. And so you sit so that both the heels are tucked in and placed upon the thighs. It's again not at all an easy posture. A small detour here is that for those who have a little interest in asana, for sure, do not try Padmasana first, because there is great damage to be done by prematurely trying Padmasana. The medial meniscus can tend to tear. So this is just a small caveat emptor for those who prematurely want to get into Padmasana. And Bhagavan's own recommendation is Siddhasana, which is a much more comfortable pose with one leg raised and put on the other leg. The other heel goes and presses the perineum of the body. So you just kind of sit cross-legged with the leg which is tucked in. It is tucked in such that it presses the area around the genitals. That's the perineum. So this is called Siddhasana. Even those who do the cross-legged Sukhasana are kind of close to Siddhasana in that sense. But of these two, Bhagavan says it is only Siddha which is the most excellent. So Bhagavan, therefore, as you can see, emphasizes comfort and steadiness in the posture rather than getting into all kinds of fancy postures just for the sake of achievement. Because there is a sense of achievement in doing all the complicated postures, but they can be a serious distraction and they don't really take you beyond a point. Beyond a point, you cannot put the cart before the horse, as they say, or the cart before the horse. So you cannot use the body to take you to self-knowledge. The body is to a certain extent helpful in creating no obstacles for you so that you can practice Atma Vichara. And so in that sense, Bhagavan says, of these two, it is only Siddhasana that is the most excellent. Thus the yoga texts declare, says Bhagavan. And this third limb asana, therefore, is important today, especially for people who are, let's say, more sedentary. And with total certainty, one can say that asana is immensely helpful for even Atma Vichara, particularly if there is any kind of tamas in the body, any kind of excessive sedentariness in the body, a very static desktop kind of a lifestyle, sitting around all day on chairs. All of that makes it so much more difficult to practice Atma Vichara because all the muscles at a certain deeper level have gone into minor contractions here and there. You need to stretch them before Sattva. Remember that Atma Vichara is something that sits on the top of a sattvic mind, a mind which is already fairly relaxed and quiet and at ease. The body too should be at ease. If there is a lot of bodily discomfort which is self-created, then for sure we need to wisen up and set right what we have abused the body. So there is a mistaken notion that asana practice amounts to being very body conscious. That's the other extreme, very unhelpful attitude. Because we have abused the body, we made it very sedentary, which it was never designed to do. We were all agrarian creatures of an agrarian society. So if you were really leading a traditional kind of an agrarian lifestyle, no asana practice would be probably even required. The very lifestyle, getting up in the morning, and one is supposed to take bath early in the morning, draw water from the well. There is so much asana even in the action of a pulley. Then carrying water to drink, no piped water available, sir. And so much of the need for asana stems from abuse of the lifestyle, abuse of what the body is meant to do. And so therefore, even many of us who are committed to Atma Vichara can very fruitfully practice asana with a lot of interest and commitment. It's only when asana becomes the end in itself that, yes, we need to push back and recognize that Bhagavan is not at all hung up on asana practice. His goal is totally different. But then, like I said, we don't go the other way, abuse the body, lead a sedentary life and say, no, I don't want to do asana because it's all body consciousness. It's all a lower level sadhana. That's very not a mature attitude. And then after asana comes the fourth limb called pranayama. According to the measures prescribed in the sacred texts, exhaling the vital air is rechaka, inhaling is puraka, and retaining it in the heart is kumbhaka. As regards the measure, mean to what extent you should do the inhalation and exhalation, as regards the measure, some texts say that rechaka and puraka should be equal in measure, and kumbhaka twice that measure. While other texts say that if rechaka is one measure, puraka should be two measures, and kumbhaka should be four. By measure, what is meant is the time that would be taken for the utterance of the Gayatri mantra once. Thus, pranayama consists of rechaka, puraka, and kumbhaka. It should be practiced daily according to ability, slowly and gradually. then there would arise for the mind a desire to rest in happiness without moving. After this, one should practice pratyahara. So Bhagavan has summarized beautifully the entire goal and practice of pranayama. The goal of pranayama is to discover an ability to sit quietly and enjoy that restfulness of pure being. There is no so much joy in just being without any neurotic thinkings kicking in. Pranayama helps you control, reining that neurotic thinking that is endemic today, and then discover a desire to rest in happiness without moving. One feels always I should be doing something to be happy. So pranayama gives you that first glimpse that I can be happy without actually doing anything. And then Bhagavan goes on to list the different methods of pranayama. Broadly, they refer to the measure between inhalation and exhalation, the ratio. And so the popular texts, especially the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, lists the ratio to be 1-4-2, where 1 is 1 chant of Gayatri Mantra, you inhale, 2 chants of Gayatri Mantra, you retain the breath, which is called Kumbhaka, and 4 chants of Gayatri you retain, and 2 chants you exhale, 1-4-2. Okay? 1 inhale, 4 retain, and 2 exhale. And this ratio, remember, is only a kind of guideline ratio. You can always modify it, and which is what Bhagavan pretty much does here in saying that some texts say that Rechaka and Puraka should be equal in measure, with Kumbhaka twice that measure. So some texts say do 1 chant of inhalation, 2 chants of retention, 1 chant of exhalation. A much easier and the realistic measure, really. And as an aside, I might say that if you're not accustomed to even this 1-to-1 ratio, just do a simple inhale and an exhale timed to any one mantra. Just take Bhagavan's mantra, 1 chant, inhale, and retain for a short pause. Doesn't have to be even 1 chant, then exhale. See if you're comfortable with that. Gives immense benefit, especially on days when you feel, I don't have the mood to do any spiritual practice. I don't have the mood to really do any Atma Vichara. Remember, Atma Vichara is such a subtle practice. You cannot force yourself to do it. It's like how you might sleep, for example. You can only set the bed, turn off the lights and switch on the fan if it's summer, and then sleep occurs, right? So Atma Vichara, which is what in tradition is called Nididhyasanam, is not something you can force yourself to do. Forcing is possible at the level of mantra repetition, for example, but not Atma Vichara. And so these limbs, such as pranayama, are helpful to set the tone, to create a certain mood, if you like, ambience, where Atma Vichara is very natural. And you kind of fall into Atma Vichara. The way people fall into love, as they say, you fall into Atma Vichara. And so pranayama, therefore, should be done gradually, Bhagavan says. One should practice gradually according to ability, slowly and gradually, no force. That can be counterproductive. So for starts, just try a simple inhale, chanting the mantra of Bhagavan, or any other mantra if you're preferring that. Say we take Bhagavan's Dvadashakshari mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Then short pause and then exhale. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Exhale. So perfect and excellent way of doing pranayama. 1 short pause, again 1 chant, exhale. And then this itself, as you continue to do, you can increase the number of chants. If you can hold for longer or exhale longer, more desirably. So chant 1 inhale, Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Short pause, and then 2 chants on the exhale. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. So the chant which we did just now is the chant or the mantra of Bhagavan. For those who do not know, or if you are unfamiliar, or maybe you didn't catch the pronunciation, Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya, a very beautiful mantra handwritten by Bhagavan himself in the works which he has composed. And it denotes, I salute the Lord Bhagavan Ramana. Ramana itself is the Lord of the universe. Bhagavan means one possessed of all the glories. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya, just to take a small detour into what I just said to complete that idea, is a beautiful mantra where we tune in and connect to Bhagavan, connect to Ramana Bhagavan. And Bhagavan was careful to say, Ramana doesn't mean this physical body. It denotes Arunachala, it denotes the Lord himself, Ishvara himself. That's fine. Whichever way you relate to that mantra, the mantra has innate potency, innate power. So as you chant that mantra, remember when I say chant, you chant it mentally, okay? Because when you're inhaling, you cannot chant. So maybe I didn't mention that. I'd like to clarify. So you in your mind chant Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Parallelly, in tandem, the inhalation happens. In your mind, remember you're chanting. So you don't have to actually verbalize it. And then retain the breath for just a short pause. And then exhale, chanting in your mind Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. So that's a beautiful mantra to time with your pranayama. If you have any other mantra, that too is perfectly fine. Om Namah Shivaya. Then you could elongate it a little more, chant it a little slower perhaps, saying Om Namah Shivaya. In your mind, you chant this, so you can inhale and chant parallelly, both together. And then exhale and chant 2 times. Bhagavan has given the ratio 1:2. So he has said, some texts say that Rechaka and Puraka should be equal in measure. So 1:2 is here, Bhagavan has said actually to be more precise. 1 inhalation chanting and 2 retention, and again 1 exhalation chant once. So through an inhale exhale cycle of this pranayama, you're able to do 4 chants of the mantra. That is Bhagavan's initial method, which is a kind of build up to do the more complex pranayama. If you didn't get that, I will repeat it. You inhale and chant the mantra Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Hold it for a while longer if you're comfortable. Like I said, you don't have to hold for long if you're not comfortable. Well, let's say you're comfortable, then hold it for 2 chants of the mantra. That duration, you'll be holding it. And again, as you chant the mantra, exhale again outwards. So this kind of a chanting time to the mantra is a very blunt force instrument. It kind of stills the mind even if it's fairly restless. As you go deeper into mantra chanting, the connection with the breath will not be there because you totally focus on the mantra itself, which flows uninterrupted. Breathing happens at its own pace. The resonance doesn't have to last because, in fact, as you go deeper into mantra chanting, the chanting is much faster generally. And in any case, it has its own frequency and rhythm. The breathing happens at its own pace, but that's for later, okay? When you do pranayama here, we go with some fixed ratio. Like I said, chant to timed to the, you time your inhale and exhale, time to the chant. And so this is very helpful to do initial steps of these 8 limbs, upon which pratyahara, the next step, comes into picture, which we will see in the next class. If you have any questions regarding this practice of pranayama, please feel free to ask. Because like I said, it's an excellent foundation for Atma Vichara and can be used even if your mind says, I don't know what's Atma Vichara, I don't feel the mood for it. Okay, I know what's Atma Vichara, but not particularly disposed to it right now. Pranayama is very helpful. Like I said, it has so much spin-offs either which way. If you remember Bhagavan's unfoldment in the Upadesasara, prana and manas are 2 branches of the same tree. And therefore, you control the prana, you're able to master the mind. Like even you reach out for the low-hanging fruit or low-hanging branch rather, then the high-hanging fruit comes to you. 2 branches of a tree, low-lying branch pull it, like a guava tree, let's say. The higher branch containing the juicy fruit comes to you. The mind is the higher branch. So pranayama is something all of us can fruitfully do as an initial stepping stone. Even for the initial few minutes of your self-inquiry, let's say session, you could do a little pranayama for anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes or a little more. It's totally compatible with Bhagavan's method and it's very helpful too. So any questions you can ask. Otherwise, we will end today's session with the Shanti Mantra. I think I saw one question saying, was the tonality important? If someone can just maybe show that, or I could just try to see that about the chanting.
Yes, sir. The question was from a new devotee, Yusel, and I will quote, "What does the chant mean? Is it about the meaning or about the tonality?" Unquote.
Yes. So in this context, remember, when we chant a mantra, the focus during the chanting process is more about the very sound itself. And so the meaning goes into the background. It is implicit. It's not as if we don't know the meaning at all, but you don't actually keep thinking about the meaning separately. You understand and appreciate the meaning of the mantra before you do the practice of the chanting. So understand it word by word and acquire a certain depth of its profundity. But once you start chanting it, you don't kind of continuously think of the meaning. It's implicit. It's there in the background. You could even possibly think of the meaning consciously for the first couple of minutes, maybe, or a minute or so, and then revert to the very chant itself, the cadence itself. The very chanting, hearing of those sounds gives you the result. That very chanting can be done outwardly or in your mind. So in this case, we were looking at chanting within your mind. So therefore, you're only focusing on the very process of chanting, and the meaning is implicit. Okay? It's inherent. You don't have to separately think about the meaning. You sell. Okay. Certain tones also have body resonance. The ones which have, I didn't get the rest of the sentence. Anuragji, can you help me with reading out the sentence?
Sure, sir. Okay, I think okay, thank you, Ugel, for your name pronunciation. The question from Ugel is, and I quote, "Certain tones also have body resonance. The ones which have physical sounds and resonances, the ones in mind, lack physical resonances." Unquote.
Yes. So the idea here is, okay, the questioner has an understanding that sounds, when they're chanted externally, have a certain physical body resonance. When you chant it in the mind, they may not have physical resonance. That's not entirely true, because as a matter of fact, the mind doesn't know the difference between a thought which is vividly thought of and an external experience. So, as a matter of principle, when you vividly think of a thought in your mind, let's say a sound like Om Namah Shivaya, vividly you think about it clearly, it is the same effect on the mind as when you actually chant it outside or outwardly. However, it's true that outward chanting is more powerful when our mind is a bit restless. It's more helpful when I am coping with certain challenges related to the body or related to my inability to sit for a long time and so on. And so therefore, it's better to chant outwardly if in your own assessment, your mind is a bit not so relaxed, not so deep. Then outward chanting is recommended. Otherwise, inward chanting has deeper, subtler effects. It's a long topic, but for now, the position of yoga and of Bhagavan's method is clear that outer chanting, very helpful, very strong in a way, but then it's not as subtle and doesn't penetrate as deeply as the inner manasam japa. In the Upadesha Sara, Bhagavan says that the hierarchy of ways of chanting goes from outer to inner, and manasam japa is the highest. So Bhagavan is very clear that if you're able to chant it very clearly inwardly, that's best. But if you're not able to, then for sure rely on the outer chanting too. You don't have to deny yourself the benefit of that. That's Bhagavan's answer based on the Upadesha Sara. So if there are no other questions, maybe we will conclude today's session here. And I will
yes,
conclude with the Shanti Mantra. Yeah. Tell me, Anuragji.
I was just going to confirm that I have checked the YouTube channel as well, and there are no questions at this point in time, sir.
Sure. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरि ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। हरि ओम।
Raghavji,
Thank you,
so
Anuragji.
much.
Kindly, yes, continue the session and have the arati.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful session, sir. We shall meet you next month. Narayananji, I shall request you now to please conclude today's session.
அருணாச்சலவர்க்கேற்ற அக்ஷரமணமாலை சாற்ற கருணாகர கணபதியே கரமல்லிகா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சலம் என அகமை நினைப்பவர் அகந்தை பேரருப்பார் அருணாச்சலா அழகு சுந்தரம் அகமும் முற்று தினமாயிருப்போம் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அகம்புகுந்தீர்த்து அககுக சிறையாய் அமர்வித்ததென் கொல் அருணாச்சலா ஆறு காயனை அண்டனை அகற்றி இளம் பழித்திடும் அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா இப்பழித்த உனை ஏனினை பித்தாய் இனியார் விடுவார் அருணாச்சலா ஈன்றிடும் அன்னையன் தெரிதல் புரிவோம் திருவோ உலகருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா உனையே மாற்றி ஓராகுலத்தின் மேல் உறுதியாயிருப்பார் அருணாச்சலா ஊர் சுற்று விளம்பிடா உன்னை கண்டு அடங்கு முன்னழகை காட்டனா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா என்னை அழித்து என்னை கலவாவிடில் ஆண்மை அருணாச்சலா ஏன் இந்த உறக்கம் என்னை திறக்க இது உனக்கழகோ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஐம்புல கள்வன் அகத்தினில் புகுமோ அகத்தில் இல்லையோ அருணாச்சலா ஒருவன் உன்னை ஒளித்தேவர் வருவார் முன்சூதே இது அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா ஓங்காரம் பொருள் உயர்வில்லை உனையார் அறிவார் அருணாச்சலா அவ்வை போல அருளை தந்து ஆழ்வது முன் அருணாச்சல 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 சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சலா அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சல சிவ அருணாச்சல அருணாச்சலம் வாழி அன்பர்களும் வாழி அக்ஷரமணமாலை வாழி उदारे स्वाम समाने स्वाम ब्रह्मे स्वाहा नमो भगवती शरणार्थ रघुनाय नमो भगवती शरणार्थ रघुनाय शरणार्थ रघुनाय नामस्ते विचारा करे एवं जीवित राशि पार्वती विश्वाय विश्वाय भोसीरं निवेद्यं समर्पयामि मध्ये विद्यमानं समर्पयामि समर्पयामि विराजं समर्पयामि विराजं समर्पयामि जीवन समाहितं नारायणं कर्पूर सोम समेतं प्रतिदिनं कर्पूर नीराजनं श्री रघुनाथमहर्षि समर्पयामि पुष्पं वेद पुष्पवान् स्वयावान् पद्मान् भवति चन्द्रमा वावां पुष्पं पुष्पवान् प्रजावान् पद्मान् भवति ॐ तत् ब्रह्मा ॐ तत् वायु ॐ तदात्मा ॐ तत् सत्यम् ॐ तत् सर्वम् ॐ तत् पुरोर्नमः अन्तर्भूते च गुहायां विश्वमूर्तिषु त्वं यज्ञस्तं वसत्कारस्तं इन्द्रस्तं रुद्रस्तं विष्णुस्तं ब्रह्मस्तं प्रजापति ॐ तदा बोधुत्रिसमृतं ब्रह्मस्वरं न कर्मणानं प्रजयादने नित्यानि एके अमृतत्वमानसु परेण नाहं नित्यं गुहायं विप्राजते नित्यदेवो विशन्ति वेदांत विज्ञान से नित्यदाता संन्यास योगाख्यादे शुद्धतत्वाः ते ब्रह्मलोके तु परान्तकाले परामृतात् परिमुच्यन्ति सर्वे तारं दिवावं परमेश्वरभूतं यत्पुण्डरीकं पुरमत्य सकुंसदं तत्रादित्यग्रमकग्नं विशोगं तस्मिन् यदन्तद्वासित्यं यो वेदातो स्वर प्रोक्तो वेदान्तसत्य प्रतिष्ठितः तस्य प्रकृतिलीनस्य परमहेश्वरः मंत्रपुष्पं रमणमहर्षिं कार्तिकाय मुल्ला वलिदेव सुब्रह्मण्य स्वामिनाथ
Namo Ramana. This brings us to a closure of today's satsang with Raghavji on Vichara Sangra. We shall reconvene next month on the last Sunday of next month with Raghavji.